Hello, I'm Ken Hirst and I'm here with Charles Smith and Darryl Yellard, and we're going to be talking about the golden era of Geelong popular music during the 1960s and 70s, and we're going to try and paint a picture of what the scene was like in those days. And we'll do that by talking about the halls the bands played in, the pubs, clubs, and the bands themselves and some of the characters that made up that era. So Charles, tell us about the venues that the bands played in.
Well, I think we've got a lot to thank the Christian Church for, Ken, because most of us started off playing in youth club halls and church socials and that sort of thing. But the main dances were held, of course, at the Palais and at the YMCA Hall in Yarra Street, the VRI Hall down in Gordon Avenue, the Croatian Hall in Pagnton Street, the Trades Hall in Myer Street, and also the I think it was the Polish Ex-Servicemen's Hall in Ryrie Street, just across the road from Dick Connolly's hairdressers, Centenary Hall, Corio.
And the pubs? There were a few pubs, weren't they?
Yeah, I didn't play much in the pubs, but I think the Eureka was the main one in the city.
The Grand Central, when it existed, that also had bands for a short time, didn't it?
Yes, and Sundowner, of course, later.
St Mary's Hall.
Didn't know that.
That had a dance, mostly like the Palais.
Can you remember any more pubs, Darryl?
Oh yes, the pubs, that all started in 1966 when the hotel closing went from 6 o'clock until 10 o'clock, and then the pubs just took advantage of that, and they had nearly every pub in Geelong had bands. From 66 onwards, I would have played in the Bowen Club, the Eureka, the Great Western, the St George Hotel. There's a couple of others over in Mellop Street, which I can't think of the name. Victoria Hotel.
The Carlton.
The Carlton. Yeah, the Carlton had bands too.
The Warren Ponds.
Warren Ponds Hotel. The Sundowner Hotel. There was just so much work for bands once they opened till 10 o'clock at night. It was unbelievable.
It was a pretty eclectic scene, wasn't it?
It really was, yeah. We were working up to 5 jobs a week.
This is the reason why we're talking to you guys, because you lived through that period. You were part of that scene, an important part of that scene. You, Darryl, playing guitar, and you on bass, Charles, and sometimes guitar, but mainly bass.
Mainly bass.
I was just a kid in the crowd watching you guys play during that, so this is where I got my enthusiasm from for the scene and for music in general. But maybe we talk about some of the bands. Talk about your band, Darryl, or some of the bands you played in.
Well, I started, as Charles said, in a little church hall in Sparks Road in Nor Lane, with some other players that didn't go on with it, but that would have been in about 1957, 58, thereabouts, and that developed into the Olympics in 1959. And then we went on to actually play here at the Palais, and about 2 or 3 years after that, one of the other bands that were playing here at the Palais, the Conbears, lost their guitar player, and he actually went to the Channel 9 Orchestra, David Langdon, and they offered me the job, and they were a full-time band, they were professional. So I left the Olympics and played with them for 2 or 3 years. And then the pub scene sort of started, and I left the Conbears, and the Olympics reformed again. And we started to play some pubs and a few jobs in Melbourne at that time, and went on with the Olympics for a while, and that then we all swapped and changed so much that developed into a band with Graham Osborne and Wayne Mackay. So we did the pub circuit in Geelong for probably 10 years like that.
Just going back to the Olympics, who were the players in that band?
The Olympics, the first Olympics, the original Olympics, were Ron Cameron on vocal, Brian Rolfe on drums, Barry Lynch on keyboards, Bernie Stall on bass originally, but he left after a couple of years, and then Dennis Parker took over. Bernie Stall went more into band promotion work. Bernie Stall took over, so that was the original band. And then when we reformed again with Gavin Grace, I'm sorry, I forgot Bob Johns, he was original too. So it was, once Gavin Grace joined, it was then the same players plus Gavin. And that was the second edition of the Olympics. And that went on for quite a few years.
And Charles, I remember watching you in the In-Group, an R&B group. Which
Yeah,
I
the In-Group
loved.
was the first group I played for money in. That started off as a four-piece with myself on guitar, Roger Feddick on drums, Peter Mills vocal and Steve Lee on bass. And then later on, for some reason or another, this gun drummer called Gordon Pendleton came along, and I don't know how, but he joined us, and Roger went on to rhythm guitar, so we became a five-piece. That was a good fun band. We played in Geelong and Melbourne and had a lot of fun.
You're a journeyman as far as the bass goes. You've played in just about every band there is in Geelong. Another reason why we're talking to you now, because you've got so much history about...
I've been kicked out of just about every band in Geelong.
You know more about the era, I think, probably because you've travelled in so many different bands, but not as far back as Darryl has.
No.
So
I started in 64, I suppose, playing with the In-Group. And then after that, my services were no longer required in the In-Group, and I joined the VIPs with Max Hope, Gary Talbot, and Stuart Garrett on drums, and they played sort of Animals type stuff and getting into soul and blues sort of things. And later on, Bob Johns joined us, and we became the Archerbacks Roll Band, and played at the Revolver in the Grand Central Hotel, and played with them for a few years, and then with the Rex Harris group at the Railway Hotel, with Rex Harris, Norm Campbellman, great singer Norm, and Gordon on drums, and myself on bass. And that was where I met my wife, actually.
Rex was on guitar.
Rex was playing guitar, yeah.
Right. It's one of the places that you mentioned, Railway Hotel. Some of these places don't exist anymore.
No, they don't.
Most unfortunate.
No.
We often used to play at the Railway Hotel till 10:15, dismantle our gear, race down to the Eureka Hotel and start playing there at 10:15 and through till 11:30.
That happened quite a bit, didn't it? I was in a band that did exactly the same thing. I think it was John Keefe was the promoter.
Oh yeah, damn it.
And we'd do a half
Mod's
an hour.
Tavern.
We'd do half the set at Mod's Tavern and then go to the Grand Central and play the other half there.
Yeah.
And that band there would swap over halfway
Yeah.
through. With all our equipment, there was no walk-ups. We had to bring all the equipment out and create
that's
everything
right.
yourself. But that was the way it was, wasn't it, in
Yeah.
those days? And everywhere you went, there seemed to be a band playing, and all sorts of bands too. The Olympics, what sort of music was the Olympics playing?
The Olympics were playing whatever was on the charts at the time. We pretty much started off playing Shadows music. That's how the band started. But then vocally, we'd be doing whatever was in the top 40 at the time. That's what we tried to do anyway. The vocal songs were all that type of thing. Whatever was around in That was between 60 and say 66. The type of music that was on the charts was what we tried to play.
Right.
Every time a new one came out, we'd jump right onto it, and we'd have the chords worked out, and we'd be doing it the next week. We tried to.
I can remember you doing very good versions of Sounds Incorporated material.
Sounds Incorporated, we did, and they were big at the time, weren't they?
They toured Australia with the Beatles.
Yeah, with Bobby Johns, covered that stuff very well actually on sax. This is always a problem when we talk about other musicians and other bands. We wouldn't be going out, we'd be playing somewhere, and there'd be every other band in Geelong playing somewhere else.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
we didn't get to see the other bands playing. We'd hear of what they were doing, but we didn't ever have a chance to see them, unfortunately.
Well, maybe I can fill in some gaps on that later, but maybe describe a night, like a normal night in Geelong, playing in, one of your standard haunts. What would that entail?
It would depend if you're talking early 60s, it would be here at the Palais, and normally there'd be two bands playing at the Palais. In my time, it would be the Olympics alongside either the Five Nights or the Conbears here on stage. And we'd be playing at that time dance music. So we had to pick songs that were either a foxtrot or a Pride of Erin or a modern waltz or whatever it is.
Ballroom dancing.
Ballroom dancing, pretty much, in that era. So the night would be listening to the other band when you're not playing, and then playing the other half of the night, basically.
Yeah.
When I was here, the Olympics, I was only 15, and my father would be sitting upstairs in one of those seats because he had to drive me here and take me home afterwards. So that was my night. I didn't really do much after the job because Dad was waiting to drive me home.
The car, yeah.
For you, I don't know, you came along a little bit later than that, didn't you?
Yeah, a bit later. We were generally playing the whole night ourselves, not with another band. And like Darryl says, we were playing quite a lot. Didn't get a chance to see other bands, or only if, say, we were playing at Surf City, and we had half the night or a bit more off, because we could then watch the Deacons, and we could sort of see the crowd and that sort of thing. And it was absolute chaos up there at Surf City.
It was, wasn't it?
It was.
Well, maybe I can fill in some gaps here, because I was a punter then. I wasn't a musician at all. And I'd go out from about 65 or 66, I'd go out and watch all the bands. Usually Mod's Tavern would be my favourite place to go, and that's where you'd have the touring bands down from Melbourne, or international groups, like the Twilights and the Easy Beats, all the big bands would come and play there. But I saw the VIPs there. I saw a lot of different bands in there.
Silver Clouds.
The Silver Clouds. I'm sure the Navs played there once.
Yes, they did.
And we might go through a list a little later on and explain who played in some of those bands.
I remember seeing Johnny Young and company down there. Played with them one night.
The Palais, I remember coming to the Palais. There's hardly anybody in Geelong who didn't come here at one stage.
Yeah.
And we've mentioned that we're sitting here in the Palais, and it's Geelong's musical centre, isn't it? It's the heart of Geelong.
It is, yeah.
And it's become a new entertainment centre again now, as the renovations take shape. So it's going to be a great future for Geelong. And
Certainly in the early days, this was the main place for music in Geelong, and everybody aspired to play at the Palais, basically.
Yeah.
And before I got to play here, I used to come here and watch with my mouth open as well, and watch some of the pioneers here playing. We're talking, my idol was Gordon Gillam, guitar player in the late 50s. I used to come here just to see him play every week, and he also played down at the Gresham most of the bands that played here played at the Gresham as well, which is the YMCA you referred to. And I'd be there every week too. I think that was Wednesday or Thursday night. And I'd listen to them. Little did I know, within 2 or 3 years I'd be playing with those people. But they were all 5 or 6 years older than me, but I'd listen to Max Hope and Gavin Cunningham. You know, they were all great musicians. Normie Campbellman, great singer as well, from those early days. And they're really the pioneers of modern music in Geelong, those people. And they're all either not with us or they're in their 80s now, those people. All those
This is
musicians.
where the Palais was where I had all my music lessons, because we couldn't afford lessons in those days. Couldn't hardly afford instruments. And I had all my lessons watching Mick Evans and Darryl Yellard playing guitar. Even though I'm the same age as Darryl, I was quite a bit behind him on the music stakes.
Yeah, I think
Yes, the Palais certainly played a big part in most of our lives, I think.
it did.
Either as a punter, as a dancer, or somewhere to come and meet a woman, or playing here, or both.
Right.
And then there was the Geelong support bands, as I call them, the unsung heroes of Geelong music scene who did the supports for the touring acts and sometimes backed them as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And without them, there wouldn't have been acts. So, and a lot of important bands. A lot of them play right here, like the Wanderers and the Five Nights.
Yep.
Yourself, the Levi's, really important bands to Geelong.
Unicords.
The Unicords, is another one.
Well, some of those early bands were the Sleepy Hollow Three, very early bands we're talking now. The Electones
Yep.
would have been right back then. The Five Nights were pretty early, and the Conbears, they were pretty much all of the early ones. Wheeler and the Wreckers was the other band that
They were the big stars.
was very, yeah, that's right, they were. They were the trendsetters, that's for sure. Normie Campbellman sang with them. Tony Blake played bass, and he had a Framus bass that was made to be a stand-up, like a double bass. But he used to string it around his neck, this whopping big Framus bass, and stand just over there. I can remember him well. And Wheeler and the Wreckers were a very good band for the time. They were right with it. And they didn't seem to last long. The members of that band dispersed into other groups.
They did.
But I remember the bands, the touring bands, the big name groups. But the scene in Geelong was such, you could go from one place to another throughout the night, and you might pick up 5 or 6 or 7 different bands. Some from just starting out, local guys just starting out, to the very top bands. And it was so easy to get work as a musician because everything was open. It was, anybody who wanted to get a crowd to their establishment had to have a band.
That's right, yeah. That's why there was so much work around. Teen Beats is another band that I didn't mention, but they were one of the early pioneer bands with Peter Snaggs Thornton.
That's him.
The lead vocalist, and they were, well, as the name suggests, all teenagers, but a very good band at the time as well.
Peter went on to found the Levi's.
He did, that's right,
Yes, pretty much. And then there was the Continental bands that were tucked away in the Polish clubs and the
Dutch club.
Dutch
There was,
clubs, Italian clubs.
Yeah,
They had their scene to themselves as well for quite a long time.
definitely.
So that was also going on. So it must have been, how many bands do you think would have been playing on any one night, on any one Saturday night? That'd be 20 or 30, wouldn't it?
Oh, at least.
There'd have to
at
be.
least 20.
Yeah. If you're talking after 1966, when the hotels all went late, then there'd have to be 20 bands playing in Geelong on any Saturday night anyway.
Yeah.
That's for sure. And that's without the private work, because we all did weddings and cabarets and that sort of work.
And
as well.
something you don't see anymore.
You don't? No.
Balls.
Balls,
Yeah. And
Wintertime.
yeah.
except the debutante balls
Dead
occasionally.
balls are still going, I think.
Just about every organisation, every big workplace, every big school had a ball.
Yes. Yes, when I played in Levi's, you've played cabaret too. We were playing every Friday, every Saturday night at a cabaret.
Yeah, that's right.
Almost
That's what it
non-stop
was
throughout
like.
the year.
Yeah.
Constant. And they were great nights too.
But for the players, you know, you can probably look through this list of bands and you'll see the same name in 2 or 3 of them because people moved around quite a bit during that period.
I don't think that's changed.
I don't think we've mentioned most of the top vocalists at the time were Gavin Cunningham, Max Hope, Normie Campbellman were the biggest of them. Ron Cameron, who was with the Olympics but eventually went to America. Never heard of him again. I'm not sure whether he continued with his singing career. And Peter Thornton, we mentioned. They were most of the big name vocalists of the time.
Gavin Grace.
Gavin Grace, who came along in the mid-60s, was one of the best in Geelong.
Yeah, he had a great voice.
A great voice, yeah.
Good player.
But then, you know, can you go through all of the drummers that played in Geelong or all of the guitar players or all of the bass players? There's so many.
Yeah, there are.
You know?
Well, friends of ours, Sam Santaspirito, he's organised a list of all the bands and all the players in them as best he could. And I think there's about 500 players just from that period.
That's right.
And about 300 bands.
300 bands, yeah.
That, just looking those two numbers together tells you that someone played in the same bands
That's
over
right.
and over.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the standouts for me, I think, were the sax players. Bob Johns and Graham Osborne were both very good in that era. As modern sax players, there are other ones. Kevin Harrington was a more mellow sax player, but he was a dance band sax player really, not so much in modern times. Drummers, the best of the drummers, well, you got Gordon Pendleton, Wayne Mackay, Colin Mayle, who was one of the early drummers in a couple of the early bands, Billy Cairncross. Got any more?
Well, there was, you mentioned Wayne, didn't you?
Yeah, Wayne.
Brian Rolfe.
Brian Rolfe, yeah, definitely. Brian
Very
Rolfe was very good from the very early days, yeah.
Yeah.
So then, bass players, you can reel those off.
Yeah, well, I really admired Tony Blake's playing.
Yeah, so did I.
I didn't see many bass players.
No one listens to bass players,
No.
do they, Charles?
It's strange though, in the early days, a bass in a band wasn't a necessity.
No.
A few of the bands didn't have a bass player at all.
The Five Nights started without a bass
They
player.
did, that's right, yeah. So the bass came along a little bit later. Guitar players, well, there was Mick Evans, who is definitely worth a mention, and a pioneer, played here, played from the late 50s. I mentioned Neil Abbott. We can't place him in a band, but I know he was playing around town at the time.
Dennis Ingalls.
Dennis Ingalls,
was very good.
who was I grew up with. He was a neighbour of mine, and we learned guitar together out of the Coles #1 chord book.
I learned out of the Nick Maniloff book.
Oh, did you? Yeah. So Dennis, definitely worth a mention. Who else have we got? Con Keats was playing.
You're getting into the
well.
60s. There was Jeff Asher. He was a very
Jeff
good guitar
Asher,
player
yeah.
because there was the pre-Beatles and the after-Beatles. The pre-Beatles was very much the dance bandy sort of thing, with all the American soppy Bobby V type music. And after the Beatles, there was a proliferation of bands. Just about everybody played in a band. And the migrant community contributed enormously to that, because the number of bands that came out of the migrant hostel at Nor Lane was incredible. And the musos, you know, we're talking about Gordon Pendleton before.
Yeah, that's right. That was
Les
another
Burke
venue.
and Peter Mills, the singer in the in-group, and Roger Feddick. He was Polish. He, you know, people from all nationalities mixed together. It was a real multicultural scene.
They did.
And in that post-Beatles era, we had the in-group that we were talking about before, the Silver Clouds and the VIPs, but also the Howling Wolves. They were all from Nor Lane. The Gnomes of Abelia, quite a few of them were migrants as well. The Bomboras, the Huntsmen, the Boys, the Victims. They were a great young band. They won the Battle of the Sounds at least once. Oh, the Syndicate. The Rhythms Incorporated, and another band called the Spectres, who were a very early Shadows tribute band. They had the sound of the Shadows down pat. And I forgot to mention one of my favourite bands, a trio called the Biggles Brothers.
The Beatles Brothers.
Who we got our start at the Argyle Hotel.
Who was the lineup then?
The lineup was Donnie McLeod on drums, Ron Edmonds, and myself on bass. And another band that stood out in that post-Beatles era was Jerry's band.
Yeah.
They were terrific.
I was lucky enough to be at school with Jerry and Melody Oswald,
Yeah.
Alan James, Rod Bell, all those guys who were emerging in the late 60s. Some a bit earlier, but mostly around about the mid-60s. And they were emerging from the schools like a lot of kids were in those days. They were coming out of schools in the east and in Belmont and out Nor Lane, and forming their groups from those areas, geographically linked to those areas. And Jerry was one of those, a great singer, Jerry. And then there's Darryl Moody, played bass.
That's right.
He was good. And John Ferguson joined on lead guitar. Rod Bell on drums. It was a great time, for me anyway, for that period of time where I started to get out and playing in groups. The very first year I played, and I'm not saying this as a big note in myself, I'm saying it to show what opportunities we had back then. Such was, I started playing bass in January of '69, and by June of that year, the band had played alongside people like Doug Parkinson, Max Merritt. We'd backed Russell Morris, Marcia Jones and the Cookies, and come second in Battle of the Sounds. That's in the first 6 months.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
That's how the scene was then. There was just so much going on. You had so much opportunity to do and work with all those people.
That's right.
It was just a great time.